Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history, it's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Yeah.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up?
I appreciate all the love and support we've been getting. Shout out to our first time listeners, last time listeners, people here just to disagree with us, people here just for the Black history, people here just to give their opinion and their perspective. Appreciate all of y'all. How are y'all?
Good.
Good.
Where would you like to start?
Wherever you want.
Can somebody break this war down for me in the simplest term?
I'll give you what I know.
Okay.
I'll give you what I know.
And I'll add to it whatever.
So, early 2000s, there was an election that happened that gave the Hamas control of the government in the Gaza Strip extended in Palestine. And for those that don't know, the Hamas has been defined as a terrorist group. Even some of the actions that they've done that they've taken credit for, whether they are technically a government or a terrorist group or not, has been terrorist-like. Mm-hmm. So they've always been linked to terrorism. But they are the controlling government in the Gaza Strip, the Palestine portion of Gaza Strip. Now, what Gaza Strip is, there's Israelis and Palestinians that live on this strip of land that's between the two.
Right.
And the agreement was that they live in peace, where you have the Palestinians are, predominantly Muslim and the Israelis are predominantly Christian. And they live in harmony on this Gaza Strip. But you have this Hamas government that says that, we can't stand Christians, just to be blunt, because they are a terrorist group. And what happens is every so often there's conflict on Gaza Strip to where Israel has been trying to take the high road in a lot of cases. Now, I'm not picking sides, but I will say this, as the United States has made the statement all the way back to the invasion in Afghanistan, is that we will never take the side of a terrorist group. We will never negotiate with a terrorist group, which means automatically America is on the side of Israel, no matter what happens, because Hamas is a terrorist group and they're not a government. Has nothing to do with the Palestinian people. Has to do with that government group that controls, let's just be real, whether they control the government is irrelevant. They control the army. They control the military in that region. With that comes the support that Palestine also gets from Iran, which makes it a little more tricky in terms of what people are willing to do to help. For the United States, we basically fund these things. We don't get involved yet. Mm-hmm. But trying to fund two wars is going to be difficult. We did that already with Afghanistan and then the invasion on Iraq. So trying to fund two wars is going to be telling financially for the United States. But that's what's happening. Israel has always been a country that says, we take care of ourselves. We don't really need no help. We got this. And that's what they do.
Before you go forward, is helping fund the war, is that not being involved?
Well, when I say be involved, we'll help fund and we'll send military weapons and equipment, but we have not put boots on the ground and physically said we were going to do this or that. We did intercept some missiles that was launched towards Israel, I think from Libya, over the week. I think it was from Libya. But some missiles that was launched, we did intercept those missiles from striking Israel. So we have been involved to that extent. But when we talk about involvement, we're talking about boots on the ground and shots fired, right? So as of yet, that hasn't happened for either one of these wars. Second war being the Ukrainian-Russian war. So
Yeah. The other side to that is, so that land that they call that were the Israel is at was basically given to them, given to the Jews after the Holocaust.
that's right.
And basically this was the land of those Palestinians at first. So they were given this land in the middle of this, like you said, predominantly Muslim area or Islamic area. But what has also been happening is Israel has been doing a lot what people who gave them that land does, which is colonizing. So when you have Britain who give you that land, and you know that you have Britain on standby, you know you have the USA on standby, you know you have some of the great forces on standby, it's allowed them to do certain things to the Palestinians that
Right.
basically oppress them. So
right.
in our sense, it's similar to what African Americans and Native Americans have went through the United States, where on the outside looking in, it look like the Native Americans and the African Americans are just complaining. But when you go in the inside and you
That's
look
right.
at the history of it, it's the colonizers who basically have this type of feeling and type of colonization and type of government and system that makes things go the way that they go. So, and like he said, yes, the U.S. give military access, guns and or attention to Israel. But let's be honestly clear: the United States government and those other allies don't get involved with foreign affairs unless there's something that benefits them.
That's right.
So in that area of that they call Israel, the United States have basically the authority to have military there to basically keep eyes on the things that goes on
That's
in
right.
those Islamic places like terrorist groups. So the only reason that the United States is so forthcoming is not because they give a damn about Israel. It's because there's a benefit for us to be able to be an ally with them so we can have closer proximity to what goes on in the Middle East.
That's right.
So a lot of people are just are going with Palestine is because we know, even in this country, not to be anti-Semitic, but how Jews control a lot of things, like we talk about with hip hop music, how they control a lot of government entities. The same thing's happening over there, where those Jews are controlling a lot of things in that Palestinians people, where they've bombed places, where they've took refugees, where they've done things that the government won't talk about, and it's always looked like it's the Palestinians' fault when truly it goes both ways. And what's happening over there.
So, because I know whatever he say is gonna get looked at differently because of the millions of fans that he has. But I've seen a lot of people, and we don't. It's probably not even Braun's statement. It's probably somebody in his camp statement, and he just put it out. Should athletes shut up if they don't know what's going on?
Yeah, and the problem is when you just think of the word Israel, right? Most people refer it back to the biblical times.
That's
and to
right.
say that we're going to protect Israel because those are God's chosen people.
That's right.
So a lot of people, when they hear Israel, they affect that back to the Bible.
Israelites.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
they say we need to protect Israel at all costs. Everything, we need to keep eyes on what's going on in Israel because these are biblical things. Also, we have to understand is who LeBron James works for. A lot of those people, a lot of those companies, again, owned by Jews, owned by Jewish people. So when you look at not trying to be anti-Semitic and all of those things, a lot of these people are just coming out because either one, they have Jewish connections. Number two, they think of it biblically. And number three, they only see what they see on the news, which is this is what the terrorist groups, because in the United States, they look at those people as terrorist groups. When we talk about the Hamas and Palestinians and all of those things, they look at them as terrorist groups. So when you see it on the news, it looks one way.
That's right.
So a lot of people are just coming out and agreeing because they saying, oh, the Hamas have bombed these
Hospitals and
yes.
schools.
And then on the return, you don't see what
When Israel
does it the same thing.
That's right.
So a lot of people are coming out speaking out without knowing the entire truth.
And that's the biggest problem is because the Hamas controls the military and that they're a terrorist group, people automatically assume that everybody in Palestine is part of the Hamas, and it is not.
Mhm.
They are not.
No.
In fact, the whether they were actually voted in fairly or not is still disputed.
Yeah.
You have no way of knowing. They're a terrorist group. This is the same thing happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq. You don't know how they came into power because we weren't there.
Yeah.
We just know that they ended up with the biggest portion of the military and the controlling forces in that region. But obviously, if you could probably put two and two together and figure out it was not done correctly, but who's going to fix it?
Right.
Because everybody's going to be against the Palestinians except Iran. They're the only ones that's coming to their aid at the moment. And then whoever fired those missiles, I believe it was Libya, at Israel, because everybody's afraid of course, not the United States so much anymore. But what side is China going to take?
Yeah.
That's like the big dog in all of these wars. Well, obviously, we know China's not going to get involved in the Ukrainian war because they have a good relationship with Russia.
Yeah.
So, and right now, Russia doesn't need them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're able to take the back seat and kind of see how things going to affect their economy before they get involved in either of these wars.
Right.
Where the United States wants to play the peacemaker and everything. And as Big said, only when they have some interest divested in that region.
Right.
Like how many interior terroristic wars have been going on in Africa for many, many years?
Yeah.
We ain't did nothing over there.
No.
Right?
You when you talk about allies with these countries, so a lot of these wars start with just small countries going back and forth. And then you see the bigger countries come in and say, we're taking this side because we have interest there. So if there's oil there, we on this side because after we help y'all, then y'all help us.
That's right.
with some oil or something like that. But we have to be careful when we use the word terrorist. You think of America, if you go anywhere outside of America, people would say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group.
Mm-hmm.
More than they would say that the KKK is a terrorist group. Or
Yep.
some of these white supremacist groups are. They would say the Black Panther Party was a terrorist group.
That's
So
right.
just because somebody goes against the government on what they believe does not technically make them a terrorist group. The number one terrorist group in America are white Americans that bomb things, that do massacres and all of those things. They're the number one terrorist group.
That's right.
But when you have to be careful with just that lingo. So people have to be careful on what side that they take when it comes to these certain things. I think for the most people, we just hate to see where babies and children and people who have nothing to do with what's going on
What side
and that are being killed and affected
yeah.
in that atmosphere.
And this might be a false parallel, and y'all can tell me, but so you take, Biden has given Ukraine so much money, because, and then you have the thing that happened in Atlanta with was it the Asian community, or when they was killing people that were Asian or Chinese, I can't remember, but even they got a law passed.
Oh yeah,
and
stop Asian hate.
Yeah, and you still see it's nothing for African Americans.
So I think that parallel is probably the best one.
Yeah,
is because at the end of the day, the amount of money that we're sending to Ukraine and the package that they propose to send money to Israel far exceeds the money and reparations that they were putting together for Black Americans in this country. Far exceeds that amount.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why people have a problem with the term African and American. Because if you're Asian and American, you come from, so you probably know where you come from in sense of Asia. So that with basically your connections with America and whatever, China or wherever you're from, Japan, wherever you're from, those connections correlate. If you are Irish or Italian,
That's
you
right.
pretty much know where you come from, and you can have those correlations. So when immigrants come over here, they have relationships with people or government entities back where they're from.
Mm-hmm.
African Americans have no idea where we're from. We just know Africa.
That's right.
But we don't know what part of Africa. So we don't have any defense mechanism to say, hey, they're owed this.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? So for a lot of people, we're not getting reparations is because African American really can mean anything. Elon Musk is an African American by definition.
Yeah.
He was born in Africa and came to America.
Yeah.
By definition,
That's
he's
true.
an African American.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where would you like to go?
I'm gonna go to one of my not so favorite states first. A retired clam farmer found guilty of attack at a Florida massacre site gets prison sentence. Federal judge sentenced the man to a year in prison for his conviction of attempting to run down 6 black men last year at the site of the Rosewood Massacre, which was a racially motivated massacre on black people and the destruction of a black town that took place during the first week of January 1923. We've talked about in this podcast many times when we talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. This actually happened in Florida. At least 6 people were killed, but eyewitness accounts suggested a high death toll of 27 to 150 during that massacre in 1923. David Allan Emanuel, 62 years old, who is white, was sentenced for 6 counts of hate crime for attempting to run down a historian, Marvin Dunn, his son, and 4 other black men who were surveying Dunn's Rosewood property to build a memorial relating to that massacre in Rosewood back in 1923. A judge sentenced them to 12 months plus 1 day in federal prison for each of the 6 charges and allowed the sentence to run concurrently, even though the Justice Department has sought substantial prison term. Before the attack, Emanuel shouted racial slurs at the group from the truck, calling them the N-word. He then sped off, only to return minutes later, charging towards the group, forcing them to leap to safety and even avoid being hit by mere inches. First thing is, you think, why such a lenient sentence? Well, it's not the classic case of the judicial system sentencing whites to a lesser sentence than their black counterparts, or the judicial system not valuing black lives. It's not that at all. It was actually the classic case of blacks being forgiven and understanding. The black men felt that this offender was still valuable to the community and did not think he would do this type of thing again. The black men actually sent letters to the judge requesting mercy to be shown on the offender, not solely for him and his family, but to move on as a country. Marvin Dunn, being a grandfather himself, just as the offender, stressed the impact the prison sentence would have on the offender's family. His letter went on to say, "I know how valuable these grandpa years are, and I assure the court that we can live in peace as neighbors going forward. Someone must take the first step, and this is my taking the first step towards peace." And you would think that that would be an awesome thing to do, right? As black people, we talked about it before. We don't care what's done to us. We forgive and we try to move on and get better. The offender also had more than 30 letters submitted by his supporters, friends, and family. Even a black police chief testified and told the court that he had never had any negative experiences with the offender during many encounters of his residents being in his jurisdiction. After all of that, outside the court, the offender and roughly 24 of his supporters congregated around his truck, donning the Confederate flag, the exact likeness of the vehicle he used in the attack. The offender's last statement was this: he plans to sell his house and move to another part of town to remain close to his son's grave. And I quote, "I'm not living across from Rosewood Memorial where thousands of black people are going to come." So even after all of that, black people showing him forgiveness and going to bat for him in the court of law, he still refuses to denounce his hatred towards black people. Which again brings my question again. Why do white people hate us so much? Even when we're extending an olive branch, hell, the fuck, he extended the whole damn tree. And you still don the Confederate flag, knowing how that makes us feel, knowing what you've done, knowing the history of that Rosewood site. And then you make that statement that I don't want to be anywhere near that because other black people are going to come visit it. I still find that amazing. Incredibly hard for me to even grasp sometimes that still exists at that level, where you constantly have people asking the question, does that level of hate still exist? Yes, it does.
And I think the biggest problem, and this is our fault, is white America has sold us on that word progress so much. That word progress. So we think that if we forgive, we can move on to the so-called progress that they talk about. The problem is, if the situation was reversed, would that be?
No.
You know what I'm saying?
No.
Let's say black kid go to where they're putting up a statue of some Confederate, right?
That's right.
And he does the same thing. Would the people of that community that wearing the rebel flags and the Confederate flags, all of those things, would they be forgiven to that black kid? No, he's gonna be called a thug.
No.
He's going to be called a thug. He's going to be called, they're going to say he need to be locked up. They're going to call him every name in the book. We know this.
We know this.
And the reason why we're saying that we know this is because there's a history of it.
That's right.
We know where the future can lead because we can look at the history. We can look at the things that people are saying currently to know what the next placement is going to be. It's called context clues.
That's right.
Right? It would not happen that way. And we are too forgiving. And I know that the new generation really kind of disregard the civil rights movement. We know it was important. We know what Dr. King did was important. But it was that portion of the nonviolence that people say probably was a big problem. Just because if you hold hands and allow somebody to continue to beat you and have no remorse for it, that gives them the opportunity to keep abusing you.
That's right.
Now, from their standpoint is, we're looking for progress. We want to show you who these people are and who we are, regardless of where they stand. They've been showing us who they are for over 400 years.
That's right.
So why do we think that progress has stopped the mentality of some of these people? Like we talked about, some of these people are still alive that we talk about on this podcast. People like Claudette Colvin.
That's right.
You know, people like John Carlos. You know, not too long ago, great leaders have died probably within the last 10 years.
That's right.
Right? So we have lost so many just in the last 10 years. This shows you that not much time has passed.
That's right.
And we still continue to fall on that word progress as if just one day things is going to change by us just saying, you know what, we forgive you.
We forgive you.
That's crazy to think.
I agree.
Something I want to bring up was, you know, throughout U.S. history, there's always been an agenda to separate black families. We can go back and look at slavery, where the mother and father never had custody of the children because they were property. And back then, you know, 2/3 of black children were separated from their families before the abolishment of slavery. So if you had children in slavery, they would even threaten that I'm going to sell your child if you don't do this, that, and the third. Then after slavery, you had black codes, which was utilized to force apprenticeship or indentured servitude to put black people back on the plantation. And if black parents weren't going to do it, then they would take those parents to court and deem them unfit. And then the white people would take custody of the children and put them back on the plantation.
That's right.
So, you know, the family policing system currently separates over 200,000 children from their families every year. Black children make up a disproportionate amount of those who experience family separations. Many of the children would never be reunited with their families due to parents losing their parental rights. Even if they go through the steps to get their parental rights back, they probably won't ever get their children back. It's surprising that even the staff that work for the child welfare system or the foster care system describe their own work as racist and harmful to the families they try to protect. So when they first came up with the child welfare system, of course it was for white families. And in the 20th century, it began wielded against black and brown families, because what they were saying was black and brown families aren't married, so therefore they're doing a disservice to the children by raising children in households that are not married. Black families are 7 times more likely than white families to be reported in the family regulation system. 13 times more likely to have their child removed, and 90% of the families that are investigated are black or brown. The vast majority of parents investigated by the system cannot afford to hire their own attorney. So, like we talked about in the justice case system, if you have a court-appointed attorney, more than likely, you're not getting a good attorney. Therefore, you're probably going to lose your case. And a lot of times when they do these investigations, they're not even looking at the social economic aspect of what's going on. So if you go investigate a child and you see that the parents are living below the poverty line or struggling or living in a tough neighborhood, they actually called that parents being unfit or neglect.
That's right.
Without looking at, as we talked about in this podcast before, when you're looking at certain communities on why there's no economic development, right, why they're living below the poverty line, why black people get paid less than white people for the same jobs with the same degrees. They're not looking at all these aspects. They're just looking at numbers and saying that the families are unfit to take care of their children. They don't understand the poverty that's being punished within that economic system. Which is why it's a baseless argument, because more white people on welfare than black people.
That's right.
So if you have the means to help, why wouldn't you help the black families that are underneath the poverty line even more? But there's a system which thousands of mostly black and brown families are put under a microscope and are separated from their children. Even when you look at the court system, black girls are 3 times more likely to be removed from their home and placed in state custody than white girls. Black children are rarely reunited with their families. Black parents are faced the greater likelihood that their parental rights will be permanently terminated for something small. Black children represent about 14% in the U.S., but 23 of those children are in foster care. Which is another conversation. When you go to foster care, if you want to adopt a child, it's more expensive to adopt a white child than a black child. Now, let's go back to capitalism America, right? If something costs more, means what?
More value.
It's more valuable, right? When they did the statistics, it's white, light skin, dark skin. Literally by skin color on the highest rates of being adopted when you're in foster care. That the darker you are, the less likely you will be adopted. Even the adopted families would rather have a lighter skinned child than a darker skinned child when you look at those systems. And it's just a culmination of when we talk about the racial disparity in America, when we talk about systems, one of those things has been the black family and separation of the children from the parents to keeping the mother and the father separated, keeping the mother and the child separated, the father and the child separated, to say, like the comments we see on social media, that maybe you should raise your kids better. When in turn, we don't get the privilege that white America gets to be able to either have your kids and develop them, or even get your children back into a system to where we can be able to parent them.
That's right.
As you was talking, I can only remember I had a similar court case with my son. His attorney was a white guy, so that represented him. So when he come from social service, so when he comes and do the home visit, because we was going to court over custody, and he comes to do the home visit, and the first thing he say is, "Oh, y'all didn't have to clean up for me."
Wow.
So you just think we don't clean up. Yeah. So after he does the house inspection, he goes to see where our son would sleep. So he tells me in the living room to my face, "Hey, look, I understand what you're going through. I'm a single father who had to go to court for, my son." So, so when we get in the courtroom, I'll be on your side.
Make you think he's going to work for you.
Cool. We get in the courtroom. He sees that one of my child's mother is white.
Mm-hmm.
He gets on the stand. He tells the judge, "Yeah, I think she should get more time with him versus him."
Absolutely.
And I'm like, fam, you just sat in the living room, but those red flags didn't dawn on me until I just heard Bake read all of that.
Yeah.
And that's when I missed the red flags.
Yeah. When you look at that system, it is racial. It is racial. You know what I'm saying? That when we talk about the roots of America, we're not just talking about the system as a whole. You got to go back to how the roots started. You got to talk about how the system started, the separation of black children, right? Even if the slave master slept with the black woman and produced a mixed child, right? He still had control over how that child was going to live, whether that's free or enslaved, whether he was going to have privileges or not. But the fact that the slave master controlled whether I could send this person here or there, do this, do that, whatever the case may be. Over into the black codes. What do we do with the children? Like all of that plays a part into how the system attempts to keep black parents from having that family structure because it may not be in line to how they see things.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
I think that also plays into psychological trauma for Black Americans. I know you guys saw Antebellum.
Yeah, for sure.
And the way that it depicted the psychological trauma of our ancestors and how we deal with that. We inherited that trauma, that psychological trauma. But it also plays into another segment that we've talked about before, and our responsibility. You know, when we start to think alike, when we all start to think like black people, and we come together in that thought process and create unity, we will begin not only to fight the oppression, but to begin to build things that can help, that we can do to help ourselves. Mm-hmm. The next thing I want to talk about is something that's going to be a little controversial, because I know everybody has their different take. And this is my perspective. And I really feel strongly about this one, only because we've seen it happen so many times, and I've personally seen it happen to people that I know. Leonard Cure was pulled over on suspicion of reckless driving. Cure was imprisoned for 16 years in Florida for an armed robbery that he did not commit, who was recently released and won a settlement for $817,000 and an official apology on behalf of the state for being wrongfully imprisoned. Cure was sadly killed by a Georgia deputy this week. And for people who may have seen the video, I know a lot of people have a different take on how they feel about it. But again, like I said, this is my perspective. Cure was pulled over for speeding and reckless driving, as the deputy directed him to put his hands on the rear of the vehicle and informed him that he was being arrested and what for. Cure did not comply, stated several times he was not going back to prison, and began to fight the deputy. As he overpowered the officer tased him twice after warning him that he was going to tase him, only to result in the deputy needing to pull his service weapon, shooting and killing Cure. And I know everybody's first thought is, one, he did 16 years for a crime that he didn't commit. And the next was, he was speeding and reckless driving. Was that worthy of a person losing their life? Of course not. Mm-hmm. Of course not. However, those offenses, although they are traffic related in most situations, can be considered criminal in some states or in certain situations, as it obviously poses a potential harm to others on the highway.
For sure.
Personally, I think this situation has a lot less to do with the law and the deputy in this case. And for the deputy, he did not have any of his information regarding Cure's 16 years of imprisonment for a crime that he didn't commit. This has more to do with psychological trauma that Cure suffered. Like so many black people suffer from things that happen to us in terms of being discriminated against, and the cases that Baker just talked about with with adoption and kids being removed from Black families, even all the way back to slavery. That psychological trauma is real. And in most cases, prisons nor post-prison programs, if there are any that exist, are able to help inmates, no matter what color they are, to deal with the psychological trauma that you endure in prison, or in his case, that you go through being falsely in prison for 16 years.
Yeah.
And then you just let out one day. Boom, get out of here.
Yeah.
To prepare you for reentry into society. So obviously, in his mind, being pulled over by a police officer was a here we go again instance of where I'm being treated unfairly, and now I'm going back to prison for something that either I did not do or something that I'm not aware of that I did that warrants this type of treatment, because he wasn't prepared to manage that type of situation. Now, I'm not saying that he's not to blame. He's a grown man. But considering the psychological trauma, what do we do as a community to help people in this situation?
Right.
You know, I often think about when I was released from prison, little things that I did on a daily basis, that I did just out of instinct to protect me, that I still do today. Probably one of the biggest fears I ever had in my life getting out of prison was doing something to attract attention or garner attention from law enforcement. The first thing that comes to mind is getting gas. That in certain places in Bedford, you could pay before you could pump the gas before you go pay, or you can swipe your card and pay at the pump. So I always got a receipt. Every time I pump gas, I get a receipt. Every time I go in the store and buy something, I get a receipt. Not to just prove that I paid for this particular service or product on this event.
Alibi.
But as an alibi for later on, just in case somebody said, we need to talk to you because we think you may be involved in a crime. That I have a receipt as an alibi that said it wasn't me because I wasn't even there.
Yeah.
You know. So I think about the psychological trauma in that sense, let alone for a crime that somebody didn't commit, where they spent 16 years behind bars. He wasn't prepared to manage that type of situation. So, yeah, everybody's going to have their own ideas about what happened and what should have happened and how it could have been avoided. Yes, it could have been avoided. Absolutely. Did he have to die for a traffic violation? No, he did not. But what responsibility does he play in that? But more importantly, what responsibility does the African American community play in those situations that we know he didn't get the tools to manage that situation while he was in prison?
Right.
And we know that those systems, those programs for in those situations doesn't exist, especially for a Black convicted felon. Whether he was falsely convicted or not does not matter. But we know he didn't have the tools to manage with that, to manage those type of situations.
Yeah, that's similar to Khalif Browder and Corey Wise.
That's right.
You know, Corey Wise was in prison as a teenager, Rikers Island.
That's right.
And psychologically, that just tore him up. You know what I'm saying? Khalif Browder the same way. Both being in Rikers Island too.
That's right.
Being in isolation for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, that just drives you crazy.
Absolutely.
Especially even more when you innocent. And then because there's a lot of times, like we talk about, I don't know what the syndrome is called, but there's been people who've been put in prison for something they didn't do, that they actually psychologically think that they did.
That's right.
Just because they're there. And they like, okay, maybe I did do it.
Maybe I did do
You know what I mean?
It's to me, it's similar to a fight. You can have a fight, and then 20 minutes later, you don't really recall what happened in that fight that you was just in.
Yeah.
That's right.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Bick, is in that situation, right? Let's role play real quick. All right, me and you are officers, right? You're white. Unfortunately, you're the white officer, and We pulling dad over. Same scenario where he tells the cops, "Hey, look, I'm not going back to prison." With the ranking that comes with officers, would it be wrong if you're the superior and I pull you to the side in this traffic stop and say, "Hey, look, he already been in jail, so that means he probably traumatized of, cops don't understand that sometimes they're yelling and they might not know that they're yelling, or they're being an aggressor and don't know that they're being an aggressor. If I say, hey, look, you kind of being aggressive right now, it might be triggering things for him. Right. So we have to take in consideration that he was locked up for 16 years or he's been in prison. So it's some things that psychologically that comes with that. Maybe we should handle this a different way. Let me take it.
Yeah, true, but here's the only problem with that. And I'll shoot police a little bail on this because I understand it. When you do a traffic stop and you run the license, you probably don't have that information. Mm-hmm. That all of that information that he just gave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't know that.
But none of that's necessary. You are taught as police to treat people the right way. Right? Because let's be honest, a lot of officers are human beings. You may have something at work. You have something at home. Something might happen in your last stop. You may be going through something to where you begin to talk a little aggressive. Right. You might feel some type of way that day. But that's why we always say you don't know what anybody's going through. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful as officers on how you treat each situation, because your behavior may escalate a situation.
That's right.
One of the first things that you have as an officer in what we call a use of force continuum, most people abide by this, is your presence, right? Your presence, your posture. How do you look as an officer? Is your boots shine? Is you clean? Is your uniform pressed? All of that. Are you walking straight up right? That just lets me know you take your job seriously. That's presence. Number two, and the most important, is your verbal. How you communicate with people. It's not what you say to people, but sometimes it's how you say it. If I seen you and I'm just putting my own life and experience in. If I'm working in the jail and I see a piece of paper on the ground and I say, hey, yo, motherfucker, pick that up and throw it in the trash. Mm-hmm. But if I say, yo, my man, do me a favor, can you throw that away for me? I don't know who dropped that joint right there, but can you throw it away for me? Appreciate it. Two things. Mm-hmm. I need the paper thrown away. Two different ways of me going about it, mm-hmm. right? Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Your verbal, and this is not law enforcement, this is in your everyday life. The way that you talk to people can de-escalate a situation or escalate a situation.
That's right.
Depending on how you do it. So as an officer in a traffic stop, regardless if you're black or white, how you communicate with that person means everything. If that person is a little anxious, okay, you might feel some way. But still be professional in how you carry yourself to be able to understand that this is a traffic stop and that's all we're here for. That's right. All we're here for. So I need to get this situation under control without it escalating. So I'm going to use my verbal skills. If my partner's verbal skills are better, you go ahead. Mm-hmm. Right. You handle it. You know what I'm saying? And then we'll go from there.
And the reason I asked is because the Khalif Browder situation, once he was released from Rikers Island, his mom said that he would sit in his room and look out the window and say, they still sitting out there.
Yeah. Because he was in isolation for a long time. Right. That can mess with your head.
So now when Dad said that guy, it could be the same thinking with him is I'm getting pulled over. I've been in prison for 16 years for something I didn't do. They still fucking with me.
That's right.
That could be going through his mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was. Because he was saying things like, no, I'm not going back to prison.
Yeah, even if that's not true, in his mind, he could still say they're fucking with me. Yeah. Maybe I wasn't speeding. Maybe I wasn't reckless driving. Maybe they fucking with me.
That is true.
Because he said, I've never gotten a speeding ticket. Yeah. The cop said, well, you have now.
Yeah.
He wasn't, if you watch the video, you could tell that something was going on. I mean, you could tell by his responses. He was anxious. He was agitated. You could see that, and obviously we could talk all day long about what the cop could have did different. We could talk about that because obviously he could have called for backup. He could have taken different actions. He absolutely could have. But I also think about if that was my brother, because I had the unfortunate luxury that my brother Eugene got out 6 months before I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to learn from him how to conduct myself to prevent myself from being in those type of situations. In fact, one of my first jobs when I got out was working at a place that he worked at,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I kind of got to watch him and watch what he did and watch how he did it. And we were only gone for, 5-6 years. This guy was gone for 16. For something he didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, me and my brother, we pleaded guilty. We obviously did the shit, right? And you just wonder, if that was a relative of yours, would you have pulled them in and said, "Hey, can we talk?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can talk all day long about bitches and getting a job and clothes and movies that you want to see and songs that you want to download that you listen to. We can talk about that any other time. But first, let's talk about what happened and how it affected you and how that might impact you in your reentry to society. Because I think that for the most part, I don't give a fuck who it is. When people get out of prison, even the people that's closest to you are afraid of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid of you. I tell people all the time, when I got out of prison, I guarantee you everybody in that household said, you know what? We don't know this motherfucker. Yeah. He just got out. And we ain't know all the shit that he was doing before he went in until he went to court.
Yeah.
So we don't really know this dude.
Yeah.
I know that family members probably was afraid of him. But here's the thing. If you love somebody, you can't worry about that. You got to have this conversation with them, man. So I tell every person that I know, if you have somebody that's in prison, when they get out, you need to talk to them. Regardless of how they receive the information, you need to talk to them. Because as a black person, you already have one strike, just being black. That's inherited. You got that regardless. Your second strike is then you're a convicted felon.
Mm-hmm.
Your third strike is, unless you had higher education, some vocational training, some special skill or job experience, now you got to go out and try to get a job that's going to supplement your lifestyle.
Right.
Which means you got to be able to pay your court costs and fines, maybe child support if you got kids, and then be able to take care of yourself, pay your probation or parole fees, whatever you may have.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, he didn't have those things, but nonetheless, he'd been locked up for 16 years. That means there's a huge gap in your employment resume. Right? You have to be able to provide some type of insight on why somebody should hire you. Those are the kind of conversations we need to be having. Because if you rely on the system, it's the type of shit that's going to happen.
Yeah. And when you say, and it's important that we understand when they say they fucking with me, is the fact that I was sent to prison for something I didn't do.
That's right.
That means the system worked it away to the point that got me in prison for 16 years. That means somebody worked together hand in hand, whether that's police, prosecutor, and judge.
That's right.
So we have to understand that. The second thing is, I beat them in the end. Mm-hmm. So by me getting exonerated, now they're pissed off to get me back in there because they still may feel like I'm guilty.
That's right.
Just because I'm exonerated don't mean that I'm innocent. It means that technically they didn't prove that I'm guilty. So by me getting out, they may have a vendetta against me. That's because if they worked together before to get me in there, they might be doing it again.
That's right.
Couple things before I finish. Helen Kane was a white performer who became famous when she went on stage and sang a song. And then at the end of the song, she started doing what we call scatting in jazz, which is she started saying, boop, boop, a doop. Boop, boop, a doop, right? And Betty Boop became her signature. And Helen took Paramount to court because when they did the cartoon of Betty Boop, she wasn't getting paid for it. That's right. And it was of her likeness and all of that. But come to find out, when they went to court, a manager showed up and said that she wasn't the originator of Boop Boop a Doop. That the act was actually Esther Jones, his client. And her stage name was Baby Esther. Esther was a rising star in the jazz world. And in Harlem, people knew her because she was saying boop, boop a doo, boop a doo, which was scatting. And months before Helen sang her boop, boop a doop, she went to watch Esther Jones perform. And her manager told them in his court. But by that time they went to court, people presumed that Esther was dead because they hadn't heard from her in a long time. But even after court and after she lost, Helen Kane continued to market herself as Betty Boop, the original. And movies coming out about Betty Boop. And it's starring Black actress and singer Jasmine Rogers, giving the claim back to Esther Jones.
That's right.
And there's just a history of racism in cartoons. So when you start to see a lot of people are outraged that, you know, they're using Black characters in places where it used to be white characters. I mean, this is fictional shit.
That's right.
Right? So, but you really can't blame Disney for trying to create diversity on some stuff that they did back in the day. If you remember the movie Dumbo, the crows in Dumbo, you were literally called Jim Crow. The main one was called Jim Crow, and was voiced by a white man talking jive, and was promoted as intellectually inferior, which was equivalent to the minstrel show. In the Disney movie, Song of the South portrays of a Black former slave living happily on his former white master's plantation. This rosy and unrealistic deception of slavery and race relations in the South is propaganda. The original Jungle Book, having apes speak like African Americans with slang to draw comparison to African Americans being apes.
That's right.
Mickey Mouse travels to Africa where he encounters a tribe of savage cannibals, saying that Africans are cannibals. And yet people get mad at fictional characters, but you have non-fictional characters like William Mapother, who played a Marine Sergeant Thomas, one of the men who helped rescue some police officers in the World Trade Center. In real life, he was Black.
That's right.
In the movie, they portrayed him as white. You know, I know you probably remember this. Sesame Street was actually meant to target the audience of Black kids.
That's right.
It was rooted in Black culture, and they actually designed Sesame Street as basically like a hidden curriculum to help build up the self-worth of Black children. And it's just important that we go back and we look at the history of cartoons and depictions of Black people and how they looked at it. Like, I'm not mad at Disney. Now, I'm not mad at Disney for coming out and saying, hey, we need to correct this and make this more diverse. This isn't a situation of them using non-fictional characters and making them Black. These are fictional characters that have every right to be Black. When you look at The Little Mermaid,
that's right.
When you look at stuff like that, they have every right to be Black because back then they weren't allowed to be represented in these type of movies and these type of TV shows. And also, last but not least, I want to start a new segment called Give Them Their Flowers. And it just took me back to the last episode when we were talking about how if John Singleton knew or didn't know if he was, you know, portraying Black people in a negative light, if that contributed to the demise of the Black community. One person who didn't really give a shit about what Hollywood had to think about his movies, his writing and his directing, I think they still don't get enough credit, which is Spike Lee.
Spike Lee.
When we talk about controversial, who did the films his way without it being whitewashed, it's Spike Lee. Hell, he finally won an Oscar for Black Klansman just because people kept talking about somebody with all of this great work who hasn't had an Oscar.
That's right.
And I believe they only gave it to him because it was such a controversy that he didn't have one with all of this great work that wasn't whitewashed. When you talk about Malcolm X, the movie, one of the greatest African-American leaders, that's probably my favorite movie and probably one of the closest biopics I've ever seen to the book. That's right. The autobiography of Malcolm X. School Days, which promoted the HBCU and Black fraternities and sororities negatively and positively. He just put it all out there on the table. Miracle at St. Anna, another one of my favorite movies. You know, I used to watch the hell out of this movie, right? The story of Black soldiers facing racism during World War II and being trapped behind enemy lines. And then, of course, Black Klansman, which was the African-American detective who basically infiltrated the KKK as a Black man. And then you see black perspective movies like Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, Crooklyn, Get on the Bus, He Got Game. And documentaries like Jim Brown, All American. He even did the original Kings of Comedy.
That's right.
He's done plays like Huey, the Huey Newton story and those things. Man, when you talk about somebody with just such extensive work that gave the perspective of black people, the history of black people, unapologetically, it's Spike Lee.
I agree. You know what I hate the most though is most people didn't watch those movies and get that information. It was
all through
entertainment.
It was all through it.
But when you think about Do the Right Thing, he was the first one to expose what goes on in every black community in America.
For sure.
Is that you have businesses who have no diversity and they don't do anything but take your fucking money.
Yeah.
And that's, Sal, why ain't no pictures of brothers on the wall? Because at the end of the day, Sal was just there because you people ate his food.
Yeah.
That's it. He didn't give a damn about that community.
When you get your own business,
You put people, you put black people on the
wall.
wall. Yeah. But most people did not get that from the movie. They just got the entertainment part, right? That was the most important part to them. It wasn't until later on you start seeing the type of movies that Spike Lee was doing, and you went back and watched that and was like, "Oh shit,
yeah,
I missed that."
When you watch
I missed the police brutality part.
Radio Raheem. That's Radio Raheem in every hood.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You missed the unity when people came together and they said, "We're not gonna stand for it." You missed that.
Yeah.
You just saw the entertainment part.
You missed the person that they ignored through the whole movie who had a picture of him and was it Dr. King?
Dr. King, yeah.
One of them. You missed the part where the old drunk on the corner,
the mayor,
and you just see him as an old drunk, but he has a story too.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? You just miss those. And even in Crooklyn, just the story of a black family and this little girl who basically went through so much and had to grow up so fast.
That's
like
right.
you like all of that was just like, man, he gave you that perspective, man.
And we did. Most of us didn't catch it at the time. And now we looking back and like, yo, this dude was giving it to us. We weren't ready for it.
Not only that, think about the actors that he gave the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely.
When you think of Denzel, when you think of Samuel L. Jackson, when you think of Martin Lawrence, who he put in movie, like they were in his early films.
That's right.
Of him giving them the opportunity, and then they just skyrocketed from there. Lawrence Fishburne, Tisha Campbell.
Yeah.
Man, he just had so many.
So many.
It's the same thing when Jay dropped 444 and all the artists was like, "Hey, thank you for all the information, in this album." And Jay said it's on the 11 albums too.
Yeah.
Yes. Most people just got the entertainment
you
part.
just didn't get siphoned through it. Yeah.
You know.
But we appreciate. We love y'all. Peace.